So.
Hi everybody, thank you for coming out today to Flyleaf Books. We're your local independent bookstore, so thank you for your attendance and book purchases. This afternoon we have the pleasure of hearing from Jeff Tiberii and Mark Mehler presenting The Magnificent Seven, College Basketball's Blue Bloods. Jeff Tiberii is a journalist who has spent the last 20 years in public radio. He currently hosts Due South, a daily radio program on WUNC. Prior to that, he's reported on NC politics, higher education, the opioid epidemic, and college athletics, including multiple NCAA and ACC basketball tournaments. Mark Mehler is a longtime journalist whose work has appeared in dozens of major publications, including Sports Illustrated and the New York Times. He's the co-author of Madness, the 10 most memorable NCAA basketball finals. All right, hope you enjoy. There's food at this table, which is delicious, so go check that out. And if you haven't gotten a copy of Magnificent Seven, you can get that after the talk, and I'm sure Jeff will happily sign it. I'm going to turn this mic over to Jeff's kids, Milo and Ari, and they're going to say a couple words for y'all. So here you go.
Hi everyone, I'm Emilio Tiberii. And I'm Aurelia Tiberii. We want to welcome you to Flyleaf Books as we celebrate the Magnificent Seven. It is our job to introduce one of the biggest basketball fans we know.
Jeff Tiberii, our dad.
That was worth the trip down here.
Thanks, guys.
We got the book.
We're done. We're done. That's all. That's all we had. That's all I needed. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
We appreciate you being here very much. Milo, Ari, that was wonderful. Thank you. What am I going to say here? I really should have planned something. This is a treat. This is something I wanted. You all can hear me okay? Yeah. I mean, it's close quarters. This is a lot of fun. This was not work. This was very much I don't know, just like a side fun hustle. And I had the pleasure and the ease of doing this with Mark, who had done this before. So to have somebody who helped me understand, no, this isn't important. Don't worry about this part of it. Or, oh, this is like, I want more of that. Like, try to talk to this person or work on that element of it was very helpful for me. And I think in hindsight, it was a blessing that I didn't try to do this on my own for the first time. Like, to have Mark here was fantastic and made it a lot more fun. Like, you dealt with editors and BS and other things that, if there was that, you dealt with it. So this is Mark, for everybody who doesn't know Mark Mehler.
Going forward with what he was saying is that thank you all for coming. Mike. Yeah, I'm down. Mike. Okay, I'm down from New York. It seems like I come here every couple of years. Last year I came down. I got my first journey to Cameron. But that was wild. And the year before, Jeff took me to Dean Dome to see UNC play Virginia. So this is weird. I've been a college basketball fan for 62 years now. I'm a St. John's fan, for what that's worth. And my advice to Jeff when I called him on this was just have fun. This is just talking to old ball players and old coaches. What could be bad, So that's kind of where we are.
I'm going to throw you on the spot. Anybody who knows me knows that I love to throw people on the spot. Mark has known me. One of the questions I've gotten from a lot of people in this room and beyond is who is this guy? Who's this guy you wrote the book with? For people who don't know you, they're like, oh, is this some other basketball nut? I was like, yes, he is another basketball nut. But he's known me since I was in utero, or known me since before I was around. So
pretty close.
I'm going to throw you on the spot with because you've told me this before and it's funny, but do you have any, early remembrances?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, we don't see each other all that often, but first time I met you, you were about 18 months old. About 18 months old, and we went to a family-style restaurant. Do you remember that? My ex-wife was down there, and Jim and Pam were with us, and you were crazed. He's running all over the place. You were great. The next time I remember you, you were 9, and we were in Chicago. And you came up and you started talking to me like a peer. I mean, 9 years old, and this kid is special. I mean, just the way he talked to an adult. Well, you can call me an adult, and he was. I just knew this kid's gonna be special, and I was right. So it was just a pleasure to work with him on this.
So Magnificent Seven is about 7 teams, the 7 most successful or accomplished teams here in college basketball. Duke, Indiana, Kansas, Kentucky, UCLA, North Carolina, and the new kid on the block, UConn. And we'll kind of move through them a little bit, and we're each going to read a couple of passages. But Mark, what were some of the parameters, or why these 7?
So you had to have won at least 4 titles over a period of at least 3 decades. That was, and that's 7. A couple of programs came close. Villanova, Louisville have won 3. Maybe Florida will get to 3 tomorrow. And we did a little thing in the back, but that's what you had to do. And these programs had to be real. There had to be something to them. There had to be a lot of heft there. And if you really look at least 5 of the 7, it's more than just the actual basketball programs. It's the state. I mean, it's North Carolina, it's Kansas, it's Indiana. These are the seats of basketball in the United States. And Kentucky, and that's 5 of the 7 right there. And Connecticut only because of what they've done in the last 25 years, and UCLA because of what they did 40, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. But that's how it came to it. Yeah.
I'll build on that only briefly and say, I guess, 2 things. During the course of the interviews and the research for this book, I spoke with somebody named Dan Issel, who was a 3-time All-American in Kentucky and a great basketball player. And after Kentucky, he went and played for the Kentucky Colonels, which was in the ABA, now defunct basketball league. But one of the things he said to me was, you don't understand unless you've been here and you've been through this program. Kentucky basketball is all there is for 500 miles. And just to your point, he and others who played for the Wildcats helped me, because I've never been to Lexington. I've never seen a Kentucky game in person before. And the one other, and I'm going to appease at least someone in the crowd here. You cannot write Duke doesn't exist without Carolina, respectfully. Carolina doesn't exist without NC State. And I don't think a lot of people necessarily have an appreciation for that. And I think I probably spent 1,400 words in this book talking about the role that NC State played from a basketball standpoint in the 1950s and 60s. And they were great. And they gave birth in many ways to Carolina.
Well, I'll go further. Carolina doesn't exist without Kansas and vice versa. So you've got that. I mean, you got Dean Smith and you've got, Fogg, all this, Roy Williams and blah, blah, blah. So
let's start with a new kid on the block, UConn. I'm going to have you pull up. This is
want me to do UConn?
Buyer's choice here. Yeah.
So, all right. I'll just do a quick thing. Okay, so UConn,
And as you find it, I'll just remind the people that number one, I don't like UConn because I went to Syracuse and they won.
I don't like them either. I'm St. John's.
I know. No, I mean, most people don't like UConn, but they're in the book because they won 6 national titles in the last 25 years.
So let's go back to 1964. Okay, so just by way of introduction, Mike Ditka, when he was coaching the Chicago Bears in the 80s, his thing was to describe his team as Grabowskis, a bunch of Grabowskis. Everybody else that they played was a Smith, a sophisticated team of, fair-haired, Paul Hornig and all this. Chicago Bears are a bunch of just guys, in the dirt, Grabowskis. And that's where the term originated. So the title of this subchapter is Hail Grabowskis. Husky Mania, which is loosely defined as unbridled enthusiasm on steroids, is widely believed to have been unleashed by Tate George's game-winning buzzer beater against Clemson in the 1990 NCAA Sweet 16. That was indeed a seminal moment in UConn basketball history, but no less an august authority than the New England Historical Society, traces the birth of Husky Mania all the way back to March 13, 1964, to the moment that senior guard Don Perno swiped the ball from Princeton's golden boy Bill Bradley, dribbling away the game clock and sealing a Sweet 16 victory at Reynolds Coliseum in Carolina State. The Historical Society goes further in describing UConn versus Princeton as the classic Grabowski versus Smith contest. The Smith being the uber elite, waspy, fair-haired Tigers, and the Grabowskis, a scruffy band of small-town kids with names like Perno, Slobsensky, Della Sala, and Slimowitz. UConn's jubilation after winning 2 NCAA tournament games for the first time in its history, unfortunately, was short-lived. The very next day, the Husky Maniacs got blown out 101-54 by Duke in the Elite Eight. It was, to put it mildly, anticlimactic. 60 years later, 82-year-old Don Perno remembers snatching the ball from Bradley, who first denied that it was a clean steal, but later fessed up to the truth, like it happened yesterday. Hearing that he had been dubbed by an impeccable source as the father of Husky Mania made the old point guard very proud indeed. As for the rookie UConn coach Fred Schabel, he too was greatly pleased by the program's first extended run in the NCAAs. But being run off the court by Duke had to hurt at least a little bit, as Schabel had come to UConn after several years as an assistant at Duke under legendary coach Vic Bubas. When informed that his assistant was leaving the vaunted Atlantic Coast Conference to coach in the lightly regarded Yankee Conference, Bubas did not offer very much in the way of support. In any case, Schabel, in his first 4 years at Storrs, brought to the program a new level of organizational discipline and coaching nuance. And then it goes on, but you get the idea. So it's like, talking to Don Perno and telling this old coach, he's 83 years old, that he's the father of Husky Mania. At first, what the hell are you talking about? But the New England Historical Society says that you started the whole thing. Just a guy who's so sweet and so proud, and it was just, that's what it is. It's making some old guy, feel good.
You mentioned Vic Bubas.
Vic Bubas is all over the book.
He is all over the book.
Unfortunately.
I'm gonna pull up something from, let's start right here. This ties in, I think, NC State. Yeah, this is what we want to do. This is the subheading here. This is from the Duke chapter, and it's Hot-Headed Heyman and the Birth of a Rivalry. As peculiar as it may seem now, for a time the preeminent college basketball team in the Old North State reigned supreme in Raleigh. The NC State Wolfpack under head coach Everett Case helped build the Atlantic Coast Conference and constructed a program neighbors would seek to emulate. UNC got so perturbed by Case and losing to State that it raided the St. John's athletic department, poaching Frank McGuire. Duke opted for a resolution closer to home. They went after Case's top assistant and recruiter, Victor Albert Bubas, Vic for short. Bubas played at State under Case and graduated in 1951. He then served as the freshman coach before being promoted to varsity assistant in 1955. Although State had seen a relative dip in the latter part of the decade, Duke administrators believed, accurately as it turned out, that Bubas was the man who could elevate the program over its recent position of above average but otherwise unnoteworthy. The first big break of the Bubas era came in 1959 when a big-time recruit from New York City decided he did not want to play in Chapel Hill. Art Heyman initially had committed to play for McGuire and the Tar Heels, but during a recruiting visit, a fight ensued between Heyman's stepfather and the UNC coach. Inside the Carolina Inn, a place that still, not far from here by the way, looks like Humphrey Bogart ought to be sitting at the bar sipping a scotch while holding a long, slender cigarette, Heyman's stepfather made a comment to which McGuire didn't take kindly. "I had to step in between them," the younger Heyman said years later. "My stepfather called Carolina a basketball factory, and McGuire didn't like that. They were about to start swinging at each other." The thing blew up, a verbal commitment was reneged upon, and Heyman ended up at Duke. The incident at Carolina Inn served as an appropriate foreshadowing of Heyman's proclivity for finding himself in the middle of fights, which occurred regularly during his time at Duke. Heyman was a brash New Yorker, unpopular with his own teammates, and generally regarded as a hothead. His freshman coach, Bucky Waters, understood that Heyman had a temper and suspected that taunting and anti-Semitism would be directed at the Jewish player from the Big Apple. The Duke and Carolina freshman teams met 3 times in 1960, with Heyman's squads winning each matchup. During one contest in Siler City, about an hour southwest of Durham, Waters even took extra precautionary measures. The team went on the bus, but I drove down with Art in a car, Waters remembers. I said, I don't know what's coming, Art, but in any way they can, they're going to try to pull you down, which they did. First with, quote, very anti-Semitic, awful taunts, close quote, before some elbowing and physicality. Waters took a timeout in the opening minutes, and he used 2 others to try to quell the looming disaster. As Waters recounts this story, his jaw tightens, and he mimics a grunting Heyman in response to the coach's overtures. I knew what he wanted to do. He was a fighter, says Waters. I kept telling him, you can't do that. Waters' plan was to substitute Heyman out and have him glance up at the scoreboard, which favored Duke, as he walked by the Carolina bench. But it didn't come off as planned. Carolina freshman Dieter Kraus and Heyman got into it. Multiple accounts indicate that Kraus threw the first shot, though the Tar Heels claimed self-defense. I remember a fist coming at me, and I instinctively ducked, Kraus recounted to ESPN more than 50 years later. He missed in his effort to hit me with his right hand, and I instinctively counterpunched, and I connected with a punch to his face. And then total mayhem broke out. Regardless of who started it all these years later, the matter still resonates. The 2 benches cleared, Blue Devil Reserve surrounded Kraus and delivered body blows with fists and feet as he resorted to what he called the embryonic position in order to protect his head. Waters, who boxed as a kid in New Jersey and later taught the sport at Duke, couldn't keep his cool either. Instead of going out there and trying to bring order to the chaos, I went right to the Carolina bench, grabbed the opposing freshman coach by the collar, and threw him on the press table. His butt was hitting all the switches, and horns were going off. And it goes on from there, but that's the first fight. And if you know Carolina history, there's a much greater fight, and hopefully you'll read the book. A year later, in which Art Heyman again is at the center of this massive brawl, and a brawl that lives on YouTube to this day. There are great clips of, and I'll give you this spoiler, several hundred, if not 1,000 fans spilled out of the stands at what was then Duke Indoor Stadium, now Cameron, when a major brawl broke out. It took a dozen police officers to break up the thing. And that's what is credited with the modern day rivalry between Duke and Carolina. And what if Art Heyman?
I could be wrong. I think Heyman's from, I think, is from Oceanside, Long Island, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually had heard of him when I was in high school. He's a couple of few years ahead of me. He was a character.
And the other,
there's an Art Heyman story in the Duke chapter that I love, and I'm not gonna.
Well, you can hint at it. Is it the Mr. and Mrs.
Yeah.
Robinson? Yeah.
Mr. and Mrs. Rob. Yeah, you got to read it.
You got to read it. But Art Heyman was arrested for bringing an underage girl across state lines to Myrtle Beach years later. And we go into some detail, not too much, about this. And Heyman held this belief until his death that part of the reason they got him with this teenage girl was because Carolina people were tracking him and watching him, and it was all because of the fight 2 years earlier. There's nothing to substantiate that, but that was his belief for a long time. So we've got Connecticut, we've got Duke.
I sold the copy. I met a gentleman at the family was in mourning, and I was sitting shiva, and there was a guest in there, and he had gone out one night drinking with Art Heyman in New York. So when I told him that I was the book and that Art Heyman's in the book, he went out and he bought it. So
I love
Art
it.
Heyman sold us at least one book. Anyway, he's a wild man. Yeah.
Mark also, where are we going next? Indiana?
Well, let me do Kansas.
Do Kansas.
There's a review of the book that you can see on the. The guy had some issues with the book, but he said one of the strongest things in the book was the way we incorporate history in there, the history of these programs and the history of America, because there's a lot of racism in the book. There's a lot of there's some sex in the book. There's a lot of just America in there, violence and all this kind of stuff that really is part of college basketball as well. Anyway, let me read you what the guy really said he liked. This is Kansas, which again is really a brother program to North Carolina. Begins with a quote from William Faulkner. The past is never dead. It's not even past. On March 3rd, 1932, members of the Kansas University basketball team, coming off another conference championship season that ended with a flourish of wins over arch rivals Kansas State and Missouri, were cleaning out their lockers and looking forward to the spring planting. Meanwhile, not far away, on a family farm in Blue Springs, Missouri, unbeknownst to the team and its legendary coach, Fog Allen, a very old man named Frank Smith was taking his last breaths. His death may not have meant much to those players, but to a few aging, longtime residents of Lawrence, Kansas, with memories still aflame, the passing of Frank Smith was a final, bittersweet rite of passage from a nightmarish world of mass destruction to one where the young student athletes of KU would be safe to conduct their battles on a basketball court. Frank Smith, as it happens, was the last surviving member of Quantrill's Raiders, a gang of bushwhackers allied with the Confederacy, who terrorized much of Kansas during the Civil War. On August 21st, 1863, they turned all their vengeful fury on pro-abolition Lawrence. Smith rode into town alongside William Quantrill, where they and their comrades murdered nearly 200 boys and men, looted the banks and stores, burned every fourth building to the ground. Only 2 businesses in town were left standing in the aftermath of the infamous Lawrence Massacre. Just about everything in this town and on its major campus is drenched in historical Americana, nearly all of it horrific, sorrowful, or bold. Monuments honoring the victims of the massacre, KU memorials to the dead of 2 world wars, Korea and Vietnam. So much of Kansas history is bound up in turmoil and pain. All the messy compromises and contradictions of a democratic republic at war with itself for 237 years. The poet Langston Hughes, who spent several of his childhood years living with his grandmother in a 2-bedroom house at 732 Alabama Street in Lawrence, learned all about racial prejudice on its mean streets. There was the movie theater with the no coloreds admitted sign, the Bowerstock Opera House that let him and his friends inside, but relegated them to the N-word's heaven in the rear, and the school track team that barred the future championship high school relay runner from participation. Lawrence was where I discovered books in which people suffered in beautiful languages, not in monosyllables, as we did in Kansas, wrote Hughes in 1949. But books were not his only salve. Young Langston Hughes rooted for KU. Millions of hoop fans would eventually follow his lead. And then it goes on. But it's all, I mean, that was an interesting part for me, you know, and I think to write about. There's just more to it than shooting, you know, baskets. It's America, you know, in all its messiness, which goes on.
So you have an encyclopedic memory with basketball. I've told some of my family in recent days.
Not like Milo.
Milo, we won't throw you on the spot, but my son has a very impressive memory when it comes to basketball.
Yeah, that's what I hear.
What did you learn when you wrote this book? And I'm sure you learned a lot, but was there anything that you learned that comes to mind?
Yeah, some of the histories and stuff. I mean, going back to the 40s, 30s, 40s. There's a story about UConn. UConn played the U.S. Coast Guard Academy in New London, Connecticut. And they get there and play. It was called Connecticut State College. And they get there and they change their uniforms. They change into their uniforms. They go out in the court. They're ready to play. There was one black player on UConn's team. This is not the Deep South. This is Connecticut. They get out there. They're ready to play. And the Service Academy officials say we can't play the game if the black guy plays. The hell. So they spent over an hour, you know, debating whether he was going to play. They ended up saying, okay, the game can go on. But the coach of UConn left them, and he was the best player on the team. They left him on the bench. His name was Honey Fitch. He never played in that game. And then all hell broke loose. The student body rioted. They put out a petition to get the coach fired in Connecticut. And this is, meantime, by that point in our nation's history, hundreds of thousands of black people had served in World War I, had won medals of honor, 31 or something, won medals of honor in the Civil War. But the the United States Coast Guard Academy wouldn't let play in a basketball game. So I learned, you learn something new about America, and a lot of it isn't good. And that kind of shook me.
I think I'll try to build on that and pick up there. Perhaps the person we spend the most time on this book, and this would be me, is Dean Smith. I think, understandably so, but in this civil rights era, Coach Smith, he played a very important role, and Charlie Scott was the first black player who played at Carolina. Was not the first black player in the ACC, but we're going to try to turn from Scott through a notable moment from 1974, and some of this is selfish, but it'll make sense here in a couple minutes. Charles Scott, Coach Smith didn't refer to him as Charlie, did for Smith in Carolina what most other schools scattered across the South had continuously failed to do, integrate. Everett Case had evidently wanted to do so, but faced internal pressures. Ditto for Bones McKinney at Wake Forest. For good measure, Scott, who was also a member of the 1968 gold medal winning Olympic basketball team, was an American teammate of John Carlos and Tommy Smith in a summer of change. In the late 1960s, Miller and Scott, and I'm going to pause just for a second because I saw Larry Miller's picture right up over
they got the
shoulder, and that's Larry Miller. In the late 1960s, Larry Miller and Charlie Scott, along with Bill Bunting, Dick Grubar, and Eddie Folger, won 3 straight I always do that, don't I? Fogler, not Folger. I always do that. Eddie Fogler won 3 straight ACC titles, arrived at the Final Four 3 years in a row, and elevated Smith and the Carolina program to a newfound level of success for which they have never looked back. Scott thrust open a door that had been prejudicially bolted down, and in doing so, began to normalize a long overdue acceptance. He allowed young black boys to see themselves on Carolina's basketball team, and among those taking stock of the new look Tar Heels was a rising high school star in the small suburban Charlotte town of Pineville, situated on the South Carolina border. Without Charlie Scott, the Tar Heels might not have welcomed Walter Davis. That would have meant no fan favorite from the 1970s, no miraculous shot against Duke in the 1974 regular season finale, and without Uncle Walter, it is objectively unclear who would be coaching the Tar Heels today. We'll get to his nephew in a moment. Also, please excuse or at least try the brevity with which we must chart through all these Carolina legends. The youngest of 13 children, Walter Davis arrived on campus in the fall of 1973. Beloved by the crowds and known by the simple moniker Sweet D, Davis lined up with Phil Ford to help North Carolina sustain a place among the upper echelon of vaunted programs. He was selected as an All-American and All-ACC performer and played for Smith at the 1976 Olympics, when the United States rebounded from that travesty of 72 to win a gold medal. Phil Ford was on that Montreal Olympic team, so too were Carolina teammates Mitch Kupchak and Tommy Lagarde. The most legendary moment in the career of Walter Davis came on March 2nd, 1974. Carolina's regular season slate concluded with a home date against Duke. Down 8 points with 17 seconds remaining, it was a done deal. Until it wasn't. First a score, down 6, then a steal and score, another defensive swipe, and a bucket followed. The 8-point lead was cut to 2. Carolina then fouled, and Duke went to the line for a 1-and-1 with a chance to put it away. Remember, no 3-point line for another decade. But Duke clanged the freebie, and after Coach Smith called the timeout, but 3 seconds lingered in a very, very quiet Carmichael auditorium. Kupchak, who went on to win 3 NBA championships with the Lakers before blossoming into a stout NBA executive, a career stop that produced another 7 rings, was the inbounder. Duke dropped off the freshman now eligible, from Pineville, so Kupchak flipped Davis the rock. Sweet D took 3 quick bounces and let it fly. The release looked more like that of a shot put than a basketball. Regardless, it caromed off the backboard and in. The roar of the surprised, hysterical crowd, some of whom had departed when Carolina trailed by 8, with less than 20 seconds remaining, echoes half a century later. The cheers can easily be heard on YouTube, and with a little more searching, there may just be crevices in the aging Carmichael gym where the heroics of Walter Davis resonate like roaring waves inside of a seashell. Freshman Walter Davis tied the game. UNC won in overtime, 96-92.
Uncle Walt.
Uncle Walt. So his nephew is Hubert Davis, who's the head coach now. I'm going to try to tie this together personally and keep it together. I don't know if I can do that. So, my head is sunburned. I thought I could do this. So, my head is sunburned because yesterday, I guess I got to do it. We were at a memorial service for our uncle. Yesterday was a long day. The first person to ever tell me that story was Charles. Damn, dude, I didn't think it was gonna get me. It got me. So Uncle Charles told me that story a long time ago on the family house in Currituck. And Charles tells me the story. I'd heard the shot of Walter Davis, and Charles tells the story. And he tells this great story. He tells it really well. And he goes, I left. I go, what do you mean you left? He goes, I left the damn jet. I was like, Charles, what do you mean you left? He goes, it was over. It was over with 19 seconds left. So we left. So Charles, my wife, and her sisters are here. And Uncle Charles is their uncle. He became my uncle at some point years ago. And Charles and a friend, it might have been his brother. I don't know. But Charles and not Bill. Charles leaves, and they're walking off campus, and they see people crowded around a radio, and they're like, "What are you doing?" And they're like, "We're listening to the game." And Charles and the friend are like, "What do you mean you're listening to the game? We just left. The game's over." They're like, "No, the game's not over. We're listening to the game." So Charles missed the shot of the decade, and he owned it, and it was a good story. And for me, it was just a wild weekend. Like, I knew this was coming, and Charles had not been sick. He was all right. He met a quick demise, and he died a week ago on Friday. So we were all together yesterday. I thought I'd do that a little bit better, but I had to get through that story. And this is maybe me reaching a little bit, but that was Duke with a massive lead, or a comfortable lead with seconds to play, and the place cleared up. And then it happened again last night. So it was cool.
Now you know why I asked this guy to co-write the book with me, okay? That's why.
We can't end there, can we? Maybe that's the best place to end.
Yeah.
Is there what else is in here that you want the people?
Anybody have any questions? I can't. Anyone? No. Okay. Well.
We're glad you're here.
I've got one.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, please.
You know, maybe an obvious one, but you guys have been looking back at the college basketball, looking forward with the introduction of money. The almighty dollar has crept in some cases maybe appropriately so. Look forward at the kind of coaches and the kind of individuals who are going to thrive in the future in this new environment, as opposed to some of the greats that you all have talked about.
I'm sorry, is it a question or is it a statement?
It's a question. I mean, looking forward,
Yeah.
who's gonna thrive in this new era of college basketball?
What I will say, like Jeff Francis, because he don't want to thinking about this, but all the old coaches that I talked to, the ones who are retired, guys like Jim Calhoun and big guys, say they wouldn't coach in this environment for all the money. I asked Calhoun, would you want to do this if you were 35 years old and you could coach, here at UConn, coach championship teams? I'm like, are you crazy? I said, no. So you got to be a different kind of guy to coach in this. And you see them, Boeheim, they're all leaving, and they're not just leaving because they're 70.
Tony Bennett, Jay Wright.
They're talking about Jay Wright, on and on and on.
Right, yeah.
And I'm thinking that Bruce Pearl probably might have coached his last game last night.
You think so?
Yeah, he's 74. I mean, what the hell?
I hope it's a possibility for the next book, right? I mean, this is a look back.
He'll have to write that on his own. I'm not doing it.
He's good for a couple chapters. it's absolutely a state of flux. Like, I can give you half a dozen theories, but I think we don't know yet, right? It's going to be dependent upon a number of things. And for me, I look at the landscape right now, and I'm interested in what fixes they pursue, if any. When I say fix, right? Like, so we have the transfer portal right now. You've got 1,000 guys in there. I think, regardless, wherever you fall on this, like, oh, it ought to be amateurism versus pay them everything they're worth, like, oh, have a salary cap, whatever. The portal, it needs some level of reform from my perspective. And I think one clean way to do it is you limit the number of times somebody can enter the portal. I mean, like to me, that's like duh, right? I also think that with the NIL stuff, and I'm just to be full disclosure here, I read a book called The Fab Five by Mitch Albom. Mitch Albom, who wrote Tuesdays with Morrie. But I read a book, The Fab Five, when I was 8 or 9 years old. And from that point on, I have been, pay these dudes. This is a multi-billion-dollar a year industry, and you're not paying the young men who are building the whole thing, the majority of whom are poor black kids and whose family has never had a college student before. Like, I don't use the word slavery. I think indentured servitude is I think it's a very accurate description of what we've had for a long time. Anyway, soliloquy aside, the NIL stuff, to me, the quickest fix there, and I don't understand this, is whether it's Carolina's collective or State's collective or Vanderbilt's, like, just make it a multi-year deal. I don't have a contract, but I imagine some of you do. I don't understand why it's, oh, hey, Steve Smith, excellent point guard, inside linebacker, whatever. We want him on the pack. We want him to play for the Heels. Okay, sign a 2-year NIL agreement. Keep them there. And it's basic. I'm not a lawyer. It's basic contract, though. So if they want out, fine. They have to pay a clause, or their next suitor has to pay a clause. I don't know if that answers your question a little bit. In terms of coaches, so Carolina's in this place of flux right now with, they haven't had a lot of success the last couple of years, right? They just hired a GM. It's going to be interesting to see what happens here. I personally am fascinated to see how quickly NC State rises. Because if NC State and Will Wade figure this thing out quicker than Carolina, Hubert's, in my very humble opinion, Hubert is in very, very flimsy footing. But it's more of an open intersection of business and coaching. 2 more thoughts, then I'll shut up. I think that despite some of the improvements and changes, the NCAA is still a hindrance. They still have not. We're needing reform on the portal stuff because the NCAA fought this for decades. And here we are, the Supreme Court has said, no, like, this is bullshit. Like, you got to pay these guys. You have to make them partial, if not whole. And the NCAA has not been an honest operator in doing this in a constructive way. So, I don't know. I could go on for a while on this stuff. Like, I've spent a lot of time on it. I also think, and this is more of a throwaway, and this is me pie in the sky, the guy who cries about his uncle that he inherited from his great family. These are still institutions of higher learning. And the idealist in me says, bring them in. And if they're reading at a 10th grade level, treat them that way. If they have accommodations that need to be met, meet them. And then when their careers are over, I don't care if they never come back, leave the door open and say, this scholarship, it's good for the rest of your life. Because there's nothing better, I don't believe there's anything that is a greater tool toward upward mobility than education. And again, we're talking about predominantly poor kids who are black and brown. So give them the opportunity. And if only 10% of them eventually go back to Carolina, like, I couldn't have gotten into Carolina, right? But like, they're here, they're playing basketball. They're not honestly doing Carolina school because they're basketball players or football players. So give them the chance to come back when they're 40 or 45, and maybe it's going to help their kids too. So thank you for listening to my TED Talk. Did that spark any other questions, or are y'all ready to?
You going to write another one?
Am I going to write another one?
Are you guys together going to write another one?
Not another basketball book.
Okay. Because he wrote a previous basketball book.
Yeah. I also wrote another book about human dysfunction, but we won't talk about it.
But not American politics.
No, about just raw human dysfunction.
Your time is so.
It was fun.
Yeah.
It was fun book.
Dad.
As journalists, who was the most memorable person that you interviewed? What was the content of that interview for both of you.
Oh, in this book.
Yeah. There's a guy, I'll give you a minute. There's a guy I stumbled across by the name of Oscar Combs, who's something of a living, breathing relic historian at Kentucky. And Oscar, I talked to a couple of the players, and they were like, "Have you talked to Oscar?" And I hadn't. So I got connected with Oscar. Oscar could have a seat right here on the stage, and you might not need to hear from us too much. Like, Oscar is awesome. And he told me he was great, but he starts talking to me about listening to Kentucky Wildcat basketball games on the radio as a kid. It made me think of your dad, who used to listen. My grandfather used to listen to Red Sox games and tuck the radio under his pillow. But at one point, Oscar Combs goes, "Have you heard of the Fabulous Five?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course, like Fab Five, Michigan." He goes, "No, not the Fab Five, the Fabulous Five." And I was like,
That's great stuff.
I was like, "No." And I know basketball pretty well. So he rattles off the story of the Fabulous Five, and in brief, it is this quintet of guys who didn't lose an SEC game for 2 years. They won 2 national titles, 48 and 49. 48 was an Olympic year. There's no money in the budget. So they barnstorm after the 48 national championship season. They go around, they played a game in Lexington on the football field. So like what you saw last night, the Final Four, these scored out on the football field, they were doing it in Kentucky outside back in the spring of 1948 to raise money so that they could have money to send the team to go play in London. 48 Olympics were in London. The United States is represented by a roster that is half Kentucky. The other half was, I don't remember, but it was half Kentucky players. All 5 starters are Kentucky players. I believe Adolph Rupp coached that team. Don't quote me on that. They beat France.
He coached him in Kentucky.
He coached them in Kentucky, and then he coaches them in the Olympics. Did he? I don't know. Don't quote me on that. Stricken from the record, counselor. They beat France by 44 in the gold medal game. And like, that's it. Like, if I stop the story there, you're like, that's an amazing story. It doesn't stop there. 3 of the 5 served their country. 2 of the 5 were caught up in probably the most notorious point shaving scandal ever, including a guard named Alex Groza, who was already an NBA All-Star, but his career unraveled when the 1951 point shaving scandal, which did in CCNY, and it is this deep layered point shaving scandal from the early 50s. Adolph Rupp never brings a team back to New York City the rest of his career because of this point shaving scandal. And that's still not it, because I mentioned the 3 players. Well, all right, so there's one of the 5. He also played football at Kentucky for a guy named Paul Bear Bryant. You've heard of him? He coached at Alabama. He was the coach at Kentucky beforehand. But my favorite one,
It's got to be Cliff Barker.
and it's Cliff Barker, who's the point guard. And Cliff Barker is this wizard. He's amazing with the ball. And at one point they beat Bob Cousy and Holy Cross in the NCAA tournament. And someone says, they're like, "Cliff, like, where does your touch come from? How did you develop such a wonderful handle, passing ability?" And he goes, "When you're a prisoner of war, you don't have a whole lot of time to do anything else." And he was a prisoner of war for 16 months. His plane, Fancy Nancy III, was shot down over Germany. And he was a prisoner of war, lost 50 pounds, and they had like a half-inflated volleyball that he used to develop his ball.
That's all they had to do all day was bounce the ball and pass it around. So the guy learned how to play basketball in a German POW camp.
Wow.
That's my favorite story in the whole book.
And it might be mine.
I mean,
I'd never heard of it. 86-year-old Oscar Combs.
I doubt more than 1 out of 100 hardcore college basketball fans are going to know that story.
And if you ever go to Rupp Arena, there is a banner. 5 banners. The Fabulous 5, not Fab 5, Fabulous 5, their numbers are hanging in Rupp Arena to this day. And it's a great one. I didn't know it. So, like, for me, like,
It's
I hope we
that
sell
story.
some books, but like,
It's that
it was
story
fun
in
to
Art
do
Haven.
that stuff, yeah.
Art Haven checking he and his underage girlfriend, Mr. and Mrs. Oscar Robertson.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, those are my 2.
Those are good.
favorites.
Those are good.
So your best interview?
Well, no, I can't. There's another Oscar Robertson story there, though, right? The deal for me with Oscar Robertson, he was the ultimate. I mean, this guy. I went to a game, I was like 15 years old. I went to the old Madison Square Garden. He had 47 points, 19 rebounds, and 18 assists. And it was like no big deal. This was Oscar Robertson. He did it all the time. And so I'm talking to John McLaughlin, who was his backcourt mate with the Milwaukee Bucks and when they won the championship in '71. McLaughlin played in Indiana with the Van Arsdales way back. Anyway, so he said he bumped into Oscar. McLaughlin's telling me he bumped into Oscar a couple weeks ago, and Oscar said, you know, I wish I had known that the basketball world was going to put all this attention on triple doubles, double figure rebounds, points and assists. He said, if I knew that, I would have actually tried to do that. Wow. Oscar Robertson still breathing, thank God. A lot of good. My favorite guy, I didn't really have one. I just enjoy talking to anyone who'll talk to me. and that's not easy. When you're not, John Feinstein or David Halberstam, a lot of these guys, they, want to talk to a stranger. It's tough. I would say for everybody who talked to me, I got 12 or 13, no thanks.
Right.
So.
Thanks, y'all, for being here.
Yeah.
Have some food.
Thank you, guys. Have something to eat.
Buy books.
Buy books. And